Tell your story. Tell your story. Do it aggressively. Be authentic. The world will reward you for it.
Welcome to the show. My name is Cullen Martin, and today I'm joined by Ben Wiggins. Ben, how are you doing?
Cullen. Doing well. How are you today?
Doing great. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your story?
Well, how long do you have, Cullen? Jokes aside, I was born in Texas and went to college in Texas. Worked in sports for a few years after college, and then entered the film and television business and became a professional storyteller for 8 years, more or less. Moved to Los Angeles, lived on the West Coast for a while, sold a few screenplays, got a production company partially funded, worked as a television writer, a writer's assistant and television writer for 3 or 4 years. And yeah, really fell in love with story and the idea of content and kind of telling an ongoing narrative and all of that. And then came back to Texas and moved into the finance space and have been, working in and around that space and professional services for the last 9 years now. So that's yeah, I did an MBA at Texas A&M University during that time. Gigamaggies and Go Owls, Rice Owls. So that's a little quick paragraph on me.
Were there any specific challenges moving from, I guess, like the storytelling world to the finance space?
Yeah, again, how long do you have? It's totally different, totally different industries. Um, So there were a lot of new skills to pick up. Doing the MBA really helped. Like that was a big part of my, my financial education and and my business education. I mean, master's of business administration. But one of the things that actually did translate really nicely was business in 2015, 2016, which was when I was coming back and changing industries again, was really starting to pick up on the idea and the importance of story. And Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller was published a couple of years before that, I think. And business culture really has assimilated story pretty well and has assimilated the idea that your client is the hero of the story. The person you're serving is the hero of the story, and you are, if it's a service business, you're the guide, essentially. They're Luke Skywalker, you are Obi-Wan Kenobi. And kind of getting yourself out of the hero role was one thing that was challenging for many businesses in the early going. And Donald Miller's book, Building a Story Brand, really helped to drive that home for a lot of people. The other, there were some less mainstream elements of storytelling that also show up in that book. Kind of the idea of the inciting incident and progressive complications and crisis and climax and resolution and all of that. That's sprinkled in there as well, and that made my storyteller's heart glad.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, along with that, just the general idea of story being important in business, are there specific ways that you've seen service businesses, and specifically either professional services or financial services, service businesses, be able to use stories and put that to work through their marketing or through the way they serve their clients? Like, what have you seen in that space?
Sure. There can be a tendency to think of story as something that has to be long, and that's certainly not the case. Short stories can be just as effective, and heartbreaking in some cases and uplifting in others. But I think the content that does the best, whether it's on LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok, does tell a story now. Like it's all of the stuff that gets, the most engagement, the most likes. Like there is a story there, and you feel like you're coming to know someone or seeing something that immediately makes you laugh, or that tugs on your heartstrings, or immediately drives home a very fundamental truth, teaches you something really compelling. And we've said it many times. If you want somebody to understand a message, tell them a story. And content, I think now does that really well, and the market is very good at sorting out the content that does that well and the content that doesn't do that so well.
That's true. And there's a lot of content now out there, especially now that, like you were saying, the business space knows that it's important. And everybody knows you need to be making content, you need to be producing content. But it's also at the point now where everybody has to keep in mind that there is a lot of content out there because of that. And so you have to have the quality to go along with that. You got to be making content, but make sure it's quality because that's the only way it's going to stand out now.
Sure, and the best place for quality to come from is authenticity. It's really about who are you fundamentally, and who are your clients fundamentally, and what are the stories that matter most to you and matter most to them. And if you can find a way to speak from the heart and from your gut, your audience knows it, and they will immediately take you more seriously than they will if you're trying to be someone that you're not or play a role that doesn't really fit you. It's about finding the thing, and sometimes this can be challenging, finding the thing that is truly you and that truly resonates. But if you are being your authentic self, you have a leg up from the very beginning. And as you mentioned earlier, content is kind of the key to all marketing now. It is no longer just a marketing and sales funnel. It is a content marketing and sales funnel, especially in, more complex value propositions, the B2B space. It's so much about, who was the person that gained from this? Like, what's your avatar? Like, what is the story? That element of it is so crucial. The telling the story of who wins with your product, who wins with your service. That is vital to marketing these days. If you don't have a story to tell, you'll lose. With everything except the absolute simplest purchases. Even trades businesses, like more blue collar, handyman, painting, plumbing. Like the stories matter. It's the people in the community that benefited from your service, and those things didn't used to matter as much for more straightforward businesses like that. But anything service related, you'd better have a story to tell now.
What would you say to somebody who has a service business or works for a service business and knows they need content, but just they don't know where to start? What would you say is like the first best step to take?
I would say the first thing to do is record something on your phone. Record something on your phone and post it to LinkedIn. It doesn't have to be incredible quality. You don't need professional lighting. You don't need $1,000 camera. You have $1,000 camera in your pocket already, and you should use it. If you want to get like a little phone stand for it, but you can also just prop it up against your computer on a stack of books and say something that's meaningful to you. That is a great place to start. And from there, you can proceed to doing something like what we're doing. What we're doing isn't super expensive. And even if you work with a professional company, there are a lot of companies out there that are very affordable. Proclaim is a great one. And that is a great way to produce content at scale. A conversation like this can give you so much content, and it's as easy as having a conversation, because people think, oh, I need to script something, and I need to come up with the idea, I need to get a teleprompter, and all of that stuff, and that's just not true. Like it can be as straightforward as having a conversation about something you care about, and people underestimate their ability to just do that on command and generate a lot of great content.
For sure. So zooming out a little bit, let's talk about why content is important and why this format is really powerful. So there are, I think it's been kind of doubted, just how powerful this is.
You talking about
podcasting, opening up in a conversation and just putting it out there. What have you seen in the space from a big picture perspective that has really convinced you that this is the best way to communicate a story or a complex value proposition or any kind of message?
Yeah, so let's start with the objection, which is that podcasting is kind of a fraught space right now. There is a lot of stuff going on with relation to politics and with relation to misinformation, and And all of those, I think those concerns are valid. I think that so I posted the number the other day that over 40% of people in their 20s are now using podcasts as their primary source of information. But there's not necessarily a lot of accountability in the space. And so those criticisms are well founded. And I think it's incumbent on everyone to do their own due diligence, so to speak, and to use multiple sources of information and ideally consider multiple sources of information from multiple perspectives, and understand that, if you're listening to all conservative commentators, for example, they may all be circling around the same perspectives on things, and not everything they're saying may be true, and that's not a shot at conservatives. The same thing may be true on the left. There can be misinformation on all sides, so it's really down to the viewer, like or the listener. We have freedom of information in this country, and as long as you're not spouting hate speech, anybody can say anything. So, and there's not a kind of this standard of journalistic integrity where if you're stating facts, you're going to get fired if they're not. You'll eventually be fired if they're not true. That's not true anymore. So you can state kind of whatever you want as fact, and people can sort of create their own realities, and that is a very valid criticism of the podcasting space. The other side of the coin, though, is everyone now owns their own platform. We're here. Everyone has their own platform. It's just a question of whether or not they're using it. And Facebook and Twitter kind of were the first ones to give us that. But now, and Instagram, now TikTok, and YouTube, anybody can say whatever they want. Anybody can tell their story. And if you, as a business owner or a business executive, are not telling your story in an effective way, you are losing ground second by second, minute by minute to someone who is.
For sure. So if we're digging all the way to the bottom of this psychologically, what's happening here when people listen to podcasts and like what's going on behind the scenes?
Well, if you're talking about content and why content is so important, like the psychological process at the root of that is that people don't want to be sold. People want to buy. And so even people who are in sales now, they're in the business of helping people buy and helping people buy at the time when they're ready. People want to decide when they're ready, and they will buy then and not a moment before. The buyer has more power in today's market than ever before. And because there's so much information out there, and the service that you want is one Google away. And so people will decide when they're ready. And what is so important is to be the person standing there when that happens, to be the person that is at the top of their mind or at the top of their search results when they decide today is the day I'm going to spend the money. And that's really kind of what's at the root of it, is that people don't want to be sold. They want to develop a relationship. They want to get to know you. And that can be a one-way street at first. You're putting your content out there and they're digesting it and saying, okay, I like what this person's about, kind of getting a better feel for it. Maybe I might be interested in buying something from them someday. And then as that continues to go forward, this relationship might be cultivated over a period of months or years or even decades. And it is all about the long game. It is about being the person who is standing there when they say, today, we go today.
Yeah.
And that's when your salesperson gets on the phone and says, so lovely to meet you. And they say, we feel like we already know you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's where the content really ties into marketing and sales, because at that point, that's how it integrates. What about implementation of content? So we've talked through kind of the reason behind posting and talked through how you can just get started at a basic level. But what about where you post it and ongoing, what that looks like? What are the most important platforms and how do you stay consistent with that?
Yeah, so I think the most important platform for everybody is Google, and where that translates for content is YouTube. And usually it'll be a combination of YouTube and your website, and then your most important social platform. So if you're B2B, that's usually LinkedIn. If you're B2C, it depends on the age of your audience. If your audience is over my age, I'm 42. So if you're over the age of 45 or so, 40, like, late 40s or older, Facebook is your most important B2C platform. If you're starting kind of my age and down to about 28 to 25, Instagram is probably your most important platform. If you're under 25, it's probably TikTok. Now, if you are a government institution or what have you, then you may not be able to use TikTok for a variety of reasons we can get to some other time or never in this space. But I think YouTube is always critically important, and your website is always critically important. There's a service called Wistia that you can use to really beef up your video posts to your website, your content posts to your website, and then using blogging that comes out of these kinds of conversations, you can generate a transcription, you can generate show notes and turn those into blog posts, put that on your website as well. And then kind of your A social platform, whichever one that one is. Usually there's one that's more important to you than the others. And I didn't mention Twitter earlier. I think Twitter is most important for like breaking news now, or like kind of up to the moment updates that expire very, very quickly. Highlights for sports, things like that. But otherwise it's LinkedIn if you're B2B, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, depending on age, and then Twitter if you're something news related or stuff that's quick expiration.
Yeah. And then what about audio platforms? Do you still think those are important?
They matter. They matter a lot less than they used to. Some people think podcast and they still think Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and those are not nothing. They are still important. Some people still want to just listen, and they want to just listen in that space. So yeah, I would encourage everybody to rip the audio from your video. Always record video, and then rip the audio from your video. That's usually a 20-second process, or maybe a minute, and then post that to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. You can use a service called Red Circle to do that syndicates your content to all of those platforms. Google Podcasts, RIP, but yeah, there are, and Stitcher, also no longer with us, unfortunately. But yeah, Apple and Spotify are still a big deal. But I would say they're last on that list, which is very strange to be saying as a podcaster.
Right. Yeah, still important, but video is just really important. And I know Spotify's growing their videos, and I bet Apple Podcasts moves to video at some point. So what about this show? Let's talk about the context of this show and who is it for and why does it matter?
This show is for founders and executives in professional services and financial services. And it is about giving them an opportunity to tell their success stories and to share their challenges. And to talk through some problems of practice and some content, obstacles, and to problem solve together.
Love it. Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap out?
Tell your story. Tell your story. Do it aggressively. Be authentic, and the world will reward you for it.
All right. Thanks, Ben, for joining and sharing your expertise. Really appreciate having you here.
Thanks, Cullen. I appreciate you having me and looking forward to this show and the truths that it will reveal over time.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more episodes.